Here at Education Week, we've been digging deep into how to improve K-12 civics education. But one thing's really puzzled us. If the U.S. Constitution is the core document guaranteeing Americans' rights, what does that mean for students? There have been a lot of U.S. Supreme Court cases that have taken aim at bits and pieces of this question, but it's still pretty complicated.
I am a law professor at the University of Chicago, and I've written a book called The Schoolhouse Gate. Essentially, it's about how the Supreme Court has shaped the nation's public schools by identifying and protecting students' constitutional rights.
With Justin's help, we looked at 4 examples of rights that assume different contours for students when they're in school. We also tested our colleagues to see what they knew.
Do you know if students can wear clothing or say things that other students might view as offensive?
Yes, under freedom of speech, I believe they'd be able to do that.
I think it's up to the principal's discretion.
In the famous Tinker versus Des Moines ruling from 1969, the Supreme Court recognized that students maintained some free speech rights. It ruled that students who wore black armbands to protest the Vietnam War engaged in protected political speech. It famously said that free speech didn't stop at the schoolhouse gate. Here's the wrinkle. Since 1969, the court has recognized various limits to student expression. In a current free speech lawsuit in Fresno, a student sued after administrators told her that her MAGA hat ran afoul of the school's dress code, which permits only school logos. We don't know how a district court or the Supreme Court might decide on whether wearing this hat is protected or not, but we do know that generally free speech for students is limited in a way it's not outside of school.
What would you think if a student was randomly drug tested as part of participating in a student club?
I would doubt that that would be legal.
I feel like it would be legal, but they'd have to sign a form of consent.
The Fourth Amendment means that the government and the police generally can't search your homes or your belongings or force you to take a drug test unless they have a warrant or probable cause. But to a large extent, that doesn't include students. School officials generally only need to have a reasonable suspicion to search students' belongings for evidence that they broke school rules. And it's okay to require students to take a random drug test as part of school sports or clubs.
That is distressing to me because that is a dragnet search where the government is sweeping up all sorts of information, and the likelihood of being able to find wrongdoing by any individual student is quite low, and so that's really distressing.
It's not always clear when a search suddenly moves from permissible to excessively intrusive.
If police come to school because of a supposed crime, do they have to read Miranda rights to students they plan to question?
I would imagine that they should always read Miranda rights.
They have to read Miranda rights to everyone, so that should apply to students.
I would hope so, but I wouldn't put it past the police to not ask or not be required to ask.
Pleading the Fifth is shorthand for your right not to give an answer that might be self-incriminating. In a 2011 ruling, the court said that police at school violated a 7th grade student's Fifth Amendment rights by not asking if he understood the right to remain silent. But the court didn't draw a clear line in the sand about whether all minors must receive this warning for a confession to be admissible in court.
There are these uniformed police officers who are patrolling the corridors of American schools, and the consequence of that is that it turns a school sort of issue into a police issue. And so where 30 years ago, a matter that would have been left to school authorities to resolve, instead is being turned into a police matter. And so this is a crystal clear example of what people refer to as the school to prison pipeline.
Do you know whether paddling students is still legal in the U.S.?
Ooh, paddling students, that's a throwback idea.
I'm scared now that it is, but it should not be.
I do know because I used to live in the South and it happens all the time, so yes.
The U.S. military ended flogging in 1862, and all states had ended whippings as a judge-ordered punishment by the early 1970s. But surprisingly, the U.S. Supreme Court has repeatedly upheld paddling for students.
There are 18 states that currently permit corporal punishment, but in some respects, that overstates its prevalence because just 5 states account for more than 70% of the instances of corporal punishment, and those 5 states are all in the South, and it will come as no surprise to many that students of color receive a disproportionate share of corporal punishment. So I hope that this issue is able to be revisited.
We've looked at 4 different amendments, and we've still only scratched the surface here. But the overall thing to know is that while schools are supposed to educate kids about the US Constitution, they're also permitted to curtail some of students' constitutional rights. Also, there's no real roadmap or checklist for educators on how to balance kids' rights with their own teaching mission. It's a big challenge for schools without a clear answer. We hope you'll read more about civics, civic education, students' rights, and students' voice as part of Education Week's Citizen Z project.